I don't think I've chaired one of these before, so just to introduce who I am. So I'm Vice Chair of DORA, and my day hat is as Managing Director of F1000, which is part of Taylor & Francis. So we're, as F1000, an open research publisher, work with a lot of funders in particular, and a lot of what we've tried to do is around shifting away from using impact factors and those kind of things as a publisher. So hence my interest in what DORA is about and all of the topics that we're talking about. I'm delighted to say we've got 3 new funders who have joined this group. I'm not sure whether all or indeed any are necessarily actually in the session yet today, but just so you know, we have Leonie van Droog from and Wendy Rijmerink, both from Zonmave from the Netherlands. And we also have Katrina Manville, who used to be at the Association of Medical Research Charities in the UK, which is a sort of umbrella organisation of about 140 something charities. She's literally just about a month ago moved to being Director of Research Impact at the UK Medical Research Council. So I know she can't make this one, but she'll be joining hopefully from the next meeting. And then we've also got Emma Ralph from the Academy of Medical Sciences as well. I don't think I was going to ask if any of those were here to actually introduce themselves, but I don't think are on the list. So anyway, delighted always to have more people joining this group. So today's agenda, as you've hopefully seen from the message that went round, is we're delighted to have a presentation pretty hot off the press from the Global Research Council's Working Group on Responsible Research Assessment. This was launched only about just under 2 weeks ago at the GRC annual meeting in Riyadh. And we're going to hear about the survey and the case studies that they've put together around sort of shift in funders and around responsible research assessment. So we have 2 speakers with us today who are going to present this. The first is Dr. Anh-Khoi Trinh, who is Senior Policy Advisor at NSERC, who coordinates policy development and implementation in research security and international responsible research assessment. And we also have Dr. Peter Kolarz, who's Head of Programmes at the Research on Research Institute, better known as RoRI, was previous at the Technopolis Group, where he was Principal Consultant leading numerous studies and evaluations of research funding and impact across various countries. So I'm going to hand over to the 2 of you to give us a presentation, about half an hour or so, and then we'll have a bit of a Q&A afterwards. So please, everybody, do line up your questions ready for that. So over to you.
Thank you, Rebecca. And thank you all for allowing us to speak to this group again. We're very excited to share the results of almost 2 years worth of work to this group. And we're, well, I'll let Peter say a lot more about that type of work. As I've mentioned, I'm a member of the GRC Working Group, Secretariat, and I'm joined by Peter, who's part of the RoRI team, who conducted much of the analysis of this survey report. So before Peter will dive into more of the details, I wanted to provide a little bit more context around the work of the working group and our activities. So with that, as many of you in this audience may already know, our working group aims to advance RRA practices globally by working primarily with funding organizations through the GRC. We seek to deliver on our vision through 4 primary objectives, the 4 rounds on the right side of your slides. We want to advocate globally for the importance of RRA and work towards a shared understanding of and goal for RRA. We share practices and guidance in implementing and embedding RRA practices within the organizations of the GRC. We want to galvanize support and enable coordinated action in the GRC participant organization and work towards the common RRA principles. And then we want to provide ongoing support and extended knowledge base and where gaps and barriers persist and emerge to build upon existing work where possible. Next slide, please. As a working group of the GRC, we have members from across the world, notably 23 members from across 21 countries. This places us in a unique position to present a global picture of RRA as best as we can, and Peter can speak more to it in the survey, from the survey perspective as well. Currently, the working group is co-chaired by NSERC in Canada, Sean McGurk, who's also in the audience, and by Mohamed Ahmed Al-Shami from RDIA from Saudi Arabia. The working group is supported by the UKRI and NSERC moving forward. Next slide, please. So here is a diagram of our activities since our inception, or even preceding that. I will, however, focus your attention on the middle set of products in May 2024, when we first published our 11 dimensions of RRA. So this aligns with our first objective to create a shared understanding of RRA. So this is 11 dimensions that the GRC working group members have identified as essential for responsible research assessment. And it forms the basis of a lot of the work that have come through after that. So for example, in designing the survey, the GRC survey that was launched in May of 2024, we created the questions in a way that aligns with the dimensions of RRA. So the survey was launched in May 2024, and it was first intended to be completed in September of 2024, but we extended it until January 2025 to ensure that we had a more stronger representation globally of responses. The work actually started in 2023, so we're very happy to be able to present this 2-year work that we've been working on over the past 2 years. We also published at the annual meeting a few weeks ago the case study booklet, and we've also published an accompanying digital library that I can share in the link as well. So the case study booklet and digital library aligns with our second objective, which is to share practices and guidance in implementing RRA among funding organizations. So although we published 2 products recently, today we will focus on the survey report with the RoRI team. So next slide, please. So here's just a brief overview of the case study for you to get a sense of it. The case study, each funder submit a case study and identify which dimensions of RRA are connected to those case studies. So here we have a table with an overview of those case studies and the corresponding dimensions. The most prominent dimensions you will notice is the responsible commitment to EDI, that is dimension number 3, responsible use of influence on institutional policies and practices, that is dimension number 7, and responsible assessment of research contributions and achievements, which is dimension number 9. So these are the most prominent case studies that we have received, but that doesn't mean that that is a fulsome picture of what all funders are doing. So that may be better captured in the survey data, for example. I will also note that within this table, there are 2 dimensions where we had fewer responses, notably dimension number 4 on the responsible responses to the effects of global changes and emergencies, and dimension number 10, responsible approaches to impact assessment. So we have created this digital library in the web link that I shared, where we hope to continue to receive case study examples over the next year or so. And we aim for this digital library to be an evolving and living product that evolves over time. So if you have a case study that you would like to share, we have updated our submission template on the webpage. You can send it to us, and you can contact us, and we can also help you fill out the template as needed, and we can update the webpage with your submission when possible. Next slide, please. So here are the next steps of our working group. Like I mentioned, the case study booklet aligns with our commitment to share practices on implementing and embedding RRA practices within funding organizations. So to deliver on that, we will be hosting case study webinars in the near future to raise awareness of the different case studies that we've presented in the booklet and on our digital library. As mentioned, you can submit more case studies to the working group by sending us filling out the template and sending us the completed submission to our email. And over the next year, aligned with our third objective, we will be developing a self-assessment tool on RRA for funders to help funders better understand where they position themselves in the broader RRA space and what actions they can take to improve their practices to be more responsible. So this will be supported by a roadmap for funders. If you have any questions or are a member of the GRC and would like to join our working group, you can contact us at the email at the bottom. So with that, I can pass it along to Peter, who can dive into the GRC RRA survey.
Thank you very much indeed. And yes, in addition to many really interesting impressions, I also managed to bring back a pretty nasty cold from Riyadh, or probably from the airport air conditioning system. So apologies if I'm a little bit on the croaky side and occasionally have to reach for my tea. But nevertheless, that aside, thanks again very much for inviting us to be able to share some of these results with you. Oh, whoops. There we go. So just as a reminder, this is in fact the second GRC survey on responsible research assessment. The first one ran in 2020. It was a rather reduced scope, and we've repeated some of the question items, though not all, for various reasons, which we might get into later. But the survey overall, it covers definitions and frameworks of responsible research assessment, of which DORA is obviously one, but there are many others as well. We looked at the kinds of indicators, output types, and criteria that form part of assessment processes. We looked at assessment processes themselves and to what extent they've been modified, so particularly for grant funding. And there were two kind of special topics we had this time around. One was on narrative CVs, and the other was on the rise and current use of AI among research funders. We then also had a whole bunch of questions on funders' independence and resources to make changes, funders' practices, evaluations, and so forth. So I'm not going to go through all of these, but I'm going to give you some highlights today. Now, as Anh-Khoi mentioned, this survey was basically open for the latter half of 2024 and just into the start of 2025. We got 50 responses, so that's a response rate of 43%. That's of all organizations who were engaging in some form with GRC during the survey period. Now, I mean, it's certainly a kind of response rate I would always look to aim for, sort of certainly to be in the 40 to 50% bracket. And we were assured from many parts of the GRC that this is actually a pretty good, unusually good level of engagement. What's particularly good about our response pool is that there's strong geographical diversity. So the GRC kind of divides itself up into 5 geographical regions, and we've got pretty good representation from each one of those, and that includes quite a few from the Global South. Now, depending on how exactly you define Global South, numbers vary. We went with a fairly blunt force tool of saying, you know, is the country on the OECD DAC list? Yes or no. And if we use that as a proxy for Global South, we've got 18 responses from the Global South, so just about between a third and half of all responses. And this is really good because particularly the kind of RRA discourse tends to focus quite a lot, certainly the academic literature focuses quite a lot on a small number of usual suspect countries from the global north. So it's really nice and exciting in many ways to have something rather more inclusive and something that really does approximate to a global picture. So the full report is available on our website. I think it's linked somewhere on the GRC's publication page by now as well. If it isn't already, it will be soon. You've got a QR code there, which will take you straight through to the report. But I don't know if someone's already done it. I've got both my screens are in use, but perhaps someone more skilled at these things than I can pop a link into the chat. I think Anh-Khoi is on it. So you can have it there. And there's just in the main part of the report, I think we've got about 30 or 32, 33 graphs of various findings on various survey items, and then the full survey results in tabular form are at the back of the report. So I'm not going to go through every single little bit here, but would rather like to give you the overall headline findings. But before I get into the actual, the results on RRA itself, it's important to consider, what is the value of a survey specifically of research funders. And so here I actually wanted to start with this survey item, which was actually, it was quite near the back end of the survey, and I think in the survey design might have been a bit more of an afterthought. But this is where we asked respondents to tell us whether they would say their organization has autonomy from both government and from researcher communities. And the short answer, if you look past all the small print here, is quite a lot, particularly when it comes to criteria setting, process design, that sort of thing. There's less autonomy when it comes to, overall priority setting in science. There you tend to get more of an influence, particularly from government, but also from research communities. But when it comes to processes and criteria setting, you see there, that's the dark blue bars. Most organizations say we have quite a lot of autonomy. So this means in many ways that funders are potentially really important change makers in the system, more so, I would say, based on my own experience, than institutions, research performing institutions, for example. And this, I think, gives, everything we're talking about here a particular level of significance if we assume that, the purpose is not just to understand the world, but to change it. Research funders, by and large, seem to be in a good position to do so. Constraints, of course, exist both in terms of resources and also in political terms, and we have a whole chunk in our report, particularly qualitative comments made by respondents that really kind of put some flesh on that as well. So this is not absolute, but this is really an important kind of piece of context to keep in mind. So let's then go into the actual results on RRA. And well, our headline conclusion is that established markers and established ways of doing research assessment are going strong everywhere and are showing no sign of retreat. However, we are seeing evidence of many additional ways of doing research assessment, additional criteria, additional markers of quality, and so forth, coming into the fold as important additional and second order considerations. And the term additional is really important here. So in no way do our results suggest that we're seeing old ways of research assessment being replaced by new ways, sort of scientific quality being replaced by EDI or something, if you want to pander to that old story. There's no evidence of that. Rather, we're seeing an expansion. And I mean, I suppose if you want to take this up to a grand narrative, our understanding and funders' understanding of what constitutes good research and good science is simply broadening, and there are more considerations that are coming into the fold. I'll give you a few examples of what we mean by that in detail on the next few slides. But that's the headline conclusion. What we're also seeing is that this is not a uniform or linear process, right? This is not a process, this broadening, that's happening in the same way in all places. And our survey results can highlight that there is clearly a diversity of different directions and ways in which this transformation and broadening is taking place, but it can't yet explain it fully in detail, simply because we don't have enough perspectives from each individual region of the world, from each individual context. So in that sense, our findings also highlight there is a need for more research to understand why RRA is taking shape in different ways in different places. And it may be no bad thing. Quite likely, different things are simply important in different contexts. And we can talk more about that perhaps later in the Q&A. We can see this, for example, here in our kind of headline question when we ask what frameworks relating to RRA organizations adhere to, or to which they are subscribed. And you can see, first of all, there's no clear winner as such. We can see the GRC's own statements of principles kind of score the highest. Well, that's because it's a GRC survey. If you would add in non-GRC funders, so that would be particularly the charitable ones, Wellcome Trust, Volkswagen Foundation, Gates, all of them who aren't who don't tend to engage in the GRC as much, you'd see that picture probably skew slightly away from the GRC. But everything really kind of seems to fall in the kind of 30 to 60% kind of bracket, or at least a whole bunch of the frameworks that we surveyed for seem to sit there. So there's no one clear dominant framework, if you like. We did a little split here into Global North and Global South, and you can see there, particularly for COARA, there's a big North-South split. So among funders in the Global North, COARA is very popular, commonly subscribed to in the Global South, far less so. DORA, we also see a bit of a tendency, but it's not as stark as it is with COARA. For the UNESCO recommendation on open science, it goes slightly the other way. And then once again, for the Science Europe recommendations on research assessment practices, again, we see a strong skew towards the Global North. Once again, we would expect that because it's Science Europe. So we see this kind of multi-directionality there, and that pops up in quite a few places. Now, in terms of this story about the old and the new, I'll take you through kind of a couple of headline findings. Here we asked, what elements does your organization instruct or recommend reviewers to consider when assessing research proposals? So this is basically assessment criteria. And the scale here is one that we use quite a lot. It's going to pop up, so I'm going to explain it briefly. We asked, do you currently instruct and recommend it? Have you done so in the past, but not anymore? Are you not doing it yet, but thinking about instructing or recommending it in the future? Or have you never done this and are not thinking about doing so in the future? So particularly those middle two options there, and we'll talk about those over the next couple of slides a little bit more. Those are really about phase in and phase out. So this tells us something about direction. Those bits aren't so important now. Just look at the dark blue bars here. Now, those top few lines basically sound like your standard assessment criteria in just about any basic research funding scheme I've ever come across. Feasibility of the proposed research, soundness of methodology, ethical considerations, novelty, or sometimes also called originality of the research, and expertise of the proposed research team. Those are kind of standard criteria, which we all know and love, and they've been around since time immemorial, and indeed they come up as a top ways. But then if we look at the kind of bottom 2/3 to half of this graph, we see a whole bunch of additional criteria coming in, kind of not used as often, not flagged as often, but still pretty often. A lot of stuff around relevance of research to societal problems, to sustainable development goals, grand challenges, and so on. Potential for transfer and commercialization of knowledge. And then there are a range of other criteria in there pertaining to equity, diversity, and inclusion. So gender considerations, both within the research team and within the research itself, and various other dimensions of EDI. So these are not flagged as often as our standard long established criteria, but they are certainly coming into the fold as additional considerations and criteria that do feature quite commonly. If we look at the ways in which particularly track of applicants is assessed, we can see here again the old ways going very strong. Qualitative assessment of the content of authored publication and research output is flagged as currently instructed, currently using by just about a majority of organizations. And particularly if we look at, the phase out, that's recommended in the past, but not anymore. That's the light blue. You can see almost no one is looking to phase out qualitative assessment of authored output. So that's the old ways going very strong. Now, when it comes to more metrics-driven approaches here, what we want to look at is the light blues and the light greens. So that's the phasing out, phasing out, and the phasing in answers. And here, for most of the items we surveyed, for number of highly cited publications, H-index, cumulative number of citations, field-weighted citation scores. For all this stuff, we find as many respondents reporting phase out as there are respondents phasing in. So this is what I meant on my headline finding slide about this multi-directionality. There are no clear patterns here about things going either in or out of fashion. And we suspect there may be a degree of geographical trends here, but none that we were able to really pin down. But there simply may be certain contexts in which some of these metrics make more sense to use or less sense to use, and we can talk about that in a moment. However, there is one slight trend that we can see, and I think particularly to DORA, this might be an interesting one. Whisper it, but our results suggest there may be a phase out gradually of the crudest journal level indicators. So again, what we're paying attention to here is the difference between the light blues, that's the phase out, and the light greens, that's the phase in. And particularly near the top of that graph, journal reputation, presence of the journal on a publicly curated list of high quality journals, journal impact factors. These ones are reported by, they're still reported as being in use by many, but they're reported considerably more often as being phased out. We used to use them, we don't use them anymore, and only very rarely by funders saying, oh, we're not doing this at the moment, but we're thinking about doing so in the future. So when it came to all these kinds of, all this stuff on indicators, there's many more things we could probably say about, sure, a bibliometrician would have a field day just on these last couple of graphs. That's one of the quite interesting headline findings we're seeing there. And it's, as I said, far from absolute, but it's one of the trends that we do see, as it does seem to pop up quite consistently among the sort of cruder journal level indicators that we surveyed for. So let's leave behind the headline findings on indicators and assessment criteria and look a little bit at assessment processes themselves. Now, a lot of assessment processes in grant funding the world over look a little bit like this. Applicant submits their application. There's an eligibility check in the funder's office. The application then goes to about 2 to 3 remote peer reviewers who write some kind of a report. And then there is a review panel who ranks all the applications from best to worst, and then we basically fund from the top of that list down until we run out of money. Now, that process has been in place for a long time. It is generally very well trusted by the researcher community, but there is also an increasing recognition that there are quite a lot of difficulties with this kind of standard process. So it does create a huge amount of review burden. It can take quite a long time. There's an increasing amount of literature that also shows that while this process is pretty good at identifying the very best applications and cutting off the tail of substandard ones, at that middle bit around the funding line, that sort of upper third, it actually tends towards producing quite arbitrary outcomes. There's growing literature and experimental literature on that. We're also increasingly aware that this process is not very good at rewarding anything other than scientific quality narrowly defined. So particularly things like relevance is quite hard to reward through a process, an academically driven process like this. In response to the, if you feed me a couple of beers, I'm going to talk about this at length to you. But in response to all these issues, there are quite a few modifications that can be done. So we asked respondents to tell us what modifications to this process are in use. And amongst the most common, I guess what you might term the kind of easy wins and the light touch modification. So particularly use of international assessors, something we've seen for a long while, particularly in smaller countries, to avoid nepotism, to avoid conflicts of interest and national lock-in, use of virtual panels rather than in-person panels, of course, once again, to diversify panel membership, and particularly during the lockdown days, those, of course, got a huge boost. Use of interviews, tinkering with assessment criteria and adding additional assessment criteria into the mix. Here we saw evidence of that earlier. Two-stage application processes, this kind of thing that represent relatively minor tweaks, we see being in use, at least for some parts of funders' operations, in between 70 and 80% of funders. So those are all in pretty mean shape, and we see some variation there. What we see far less of is what you might term the more radical departures from that standard process I showed you earlier. So things like sandpits and matching events, partial randomization, which was a bit of a trend a couple of years ago. RoRI did a big piece on this. It's called the Experimental Research Funders Handbook, where we talk about that. Excuse me. In the US particularly, that was sort of pioneered there, handing out grants at the program manager's own discretion. So particularly for rapid response grant funding, that's something which we know from there. Applicant anonymization to get around some of the issues around bias that we see in the standard process. And then at the very bottom of the pack, in terms of numbers of funders currently reporting use, is distributed peer review. For those of you unfamiliar with the term, this is where, as an applicant, you also commit yourself to being a reviewer on the scheme you're applying to. And actually, RoRI is just finalizing some experiments on distributed peer review on the Volkswagen Foundation. So keep your eyes peeled for some results on that coming out soon. But this is exactly the point. We see relatively low level of use, and in many cases also a low level of appetite for these more radical solutions, even though they hold quite a lot of promise. And basically a lot of these interventions to grant funding processes pertain to RRA in that they may reduce bureaucracy and burden, increase transparency, eliminate bias, and so forth. But they all also entail a degree of risk. And in part, the reason why there is a perceived risk is because the evidence underpinning the effectiveness of some of these interventions is still patchy. We saw that, for example, in our questions on narrative CVs. So where a lot of respondents, I said, yes, we have introduced narrative CV formats. We love it. We're really pleased that we did it. Can we tell you what effects it's had? No, not really. It's too early to tell. And that is something which we heard quite often. And I'll talk about that in our recommendations in a moment. But there is genuinely a need here for more evaluative studies on all these various interventions, use of new process tweaks, new indicators, and so on. So before finishing up, I just want to talk a little bit about our findings on AI. Now, in the report, there's, I think, about 6 pages worth of graphs that look a little bit like this one. But this is just kind of the headline question where we asked funders, well, in what aspects of your operations are you actually using AI at the moment? And the headline observation is, well, actually, overall, not very much. The area where we do see a fair amount of AI use is when it comes to reviewer allocation and panelist allocation of proposals, which in many ways is probably the most mechanical task, where there is the greatest degree of trust. In other stuff, portfolio analysis, strategic questions, and so forth, we're not seeing much AI use. The other interesting part about this graph, actually, is the contrast between the light blues, that's the ones who are saying we're not doing this at the moment, but are considering it, and the grays, where people are saying we haven't used AI and we're not considering it at all. So there is this mixture of eagerness to look at it and to start using AI, but also reticence. And there's a pretty even balance between the two. And overall, summarizing the 6 odd pages of stuff, we can say AI is neither universal nor uncontroversial. And funders see both significant benefit and significant risk from potential AI use in their work. And so at the moment, once again, things go in different directions. You see funders who are quite keen to get things started, others who are just not touching this with a 10-foot pole at the moment. There's a whole bunch of other survey items around this topic, and we certainly found that where funders do start thinking about using AI, they're generally involving all parts of the funding organization, so strategy, IT, the actual funding teams themselves, organizational leadership, management, and so forth. They all tend to partake in that discussion, so it's generally not done unilaterally. We also find that expertise is generally sourced from both within and outside of funding organizations. So funders do use what expertise they have, but bring in what they can from outside, because this is obviously a huge topic where people want all the expertise that they can get. So that's the wrap up basically of our results. Now, as I said, you can go through the report. There's a ton of additional bits and pieces in there and a lot of nuance to what I just said. Most of the report is of a descriptive nature, and that was kind of the point. But we do also have a small set of recommendations. I'm not going to kind of whittle through each one of these, but the overall main recommendation I'd like to leave with you is it's important for the funding community to foster a culture of experimentation, to test, trial, and compare a broad range of process interventions, and we'd include in that also to test, the use of new types of indicators and metrics and so forth, rather than just assessment process tweaks. And this could take the shape of experiments, as we do in our FIRE program within RoRI, and many funders kind of do by themselves in-house as well. And of course, we also see a lot of testing experimentation in commissioned evaluations, which I used to do in my previous life at Technopolis. And what is critical in all these cases is that the results of all these evaluations and tests ought to be published and shared, because frankly, a lot of these interventions and a lot of the questions that are being asked by many funders. So the more we can pool our insights and create an evidence base on how well or how to make the new ways work best, the better that will be for everyone. So I'm not going to go through all the rest of this. I'm sure we can chat about that, because I think I've also just about exceeded the time we had. So thank you very much. And just to do the final advertising bit to discuss this and loads more things, I hope we'll see lots of you at MetaScience 2025 in just a few weeks' time in London. So thank you very much. I'm going to stop sharing.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Peter, and thank you very much, Anh-Khoi. Really, really great to see, and really interesting feedback. And I'd encourage everybody online, if you've got questions.